In your mind, you probably think, nah, David doesn't know what he's talking about. I promise you I do. And there's going to come a day when you wish you had listened to what I had to say because it's going to come back and bite you when you least expect it. Prospecting takes time. There's a process involved, and it's something that should never be abandoned, regardless of whether it's a hard market or a soft market. Just because you're active doesn't mean you're being productive. Just because you're getting leads doesn't mean that you're closing business. You're setting yourself up for disaster because at some time, the market's going to turn. The market's not always going to be as hard as it is right now, and the inbound leads are not always going to be flowing like milk and honey, as many agents think they are. Stay in the game. Stay in the game prospecting. Keep your line wet. If you're being objective, when you have inbound coming in versus prospecting being outbound, which one do you quote and close more business on? What's up, everybody? Welcome to Power Producers Shop Talk, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. And today I am coming to you on the heels of Producers in Paradise 2024. We had a great time down in Key West this year. It's always amazing to watch how the family from Killing Commercial Insurance Sales Training interacts with each other, how our sponsor partners are there, and just really woven into the fabric of the event. You would not think that they were vendors. They are literally family to us, and we always appreciate their participation so much, not just because financially they make the event possible, but they truly invest in the community and spend time with us, making us better and asking for feedback on their products, which I think is huge. You know, the fact that we're able to get the ear of the people who are developing the next level of technology for our industry and that they actually pay attention to what we have to say is just honestly humbling to me. And I'm so appreciative of it. So for all of our sponsors that were there at Producers in Paradise, thank you so very much. And a special shout out to IPFS, our title sponsor, who's always the first in line to write a check every single year to make sure this event happens. Thank you to Chase Courtney and Bailey Babin and everybody on the IPFS team for making sure that this event happens. We couldn't do it without you. So I'm going to thought a little bit about some things that happened when we were in Key West. But before I get into that, one of the things that really has sort of struck a nerve with me over the course of probably the last month or so is the number of producers and agency principals that I have heard telling me that they're just getting inundated with new business and they don't have time to prospect right now. And I understand that intuitively that might make sense because you're really, really busy, but I want to break that down for a second and challenge you because I don't think your thought process is right. You may have a ton of new business and you may not have time to prospect, but my pushback would be of the things that are coming in, how much of it is really stuff that you would want to write? And how much of that stuff is stuff that you would prospect if you were intentionally going after business on the streets? You're not prospecting, you're not producing, you're an order taker in inbound leads. And that doesn't mean that you can't make a lot of money doing it, but you're setting yourself up for disaster because at some time, the market's going to turn. The market's not always going to be as hard as it is right now, and the inbound leads are not always going to be flowing like milk and honey, as many agents think they are. And when that day comes, you will have zero foundation and zero pipeline whatsoever to go out and produce because you put every ounce of your effort into the inbound that's coming in and the reshops that you're doing in your agency. I understand that we're all spread thin right now. Trust me, I get it. We are going through the exact same thing that many other agencies are going through. And every single one of us is having to deal with it. But the one thing we haven't stopped doing is prospecting new business because we know for a fact that at some point we're going to need to have organic opportunities in our pipeline that are self-generated. And there's a curve. There's a curve between when you start and when you start getting traction. And you can't just shut that on and off and expect it to work right away like Google Ads do. Prospecting takes time. There's a process involved, and it's something that should never be abandoned, regardless of whether it's a hard market or a soft market. So if you're one of those agencies out there and you think, oh, I don't need to worry about it, we've got so much coming in right now, you absolutely need to worry about it because you're exactly who I'm talking to. I did a solo episode not that long ago called The Ant and the Grasshopper. And this is exactly what I was talking about. Too many people think we're getting fat and happy and they're making money. They're organically up 25% as a result of rate increase without having to do much of anything other than requote and resell. And as a result, we don't feel that we need to go out and find those things that we would want to write under normal circumstances. And so we sit back, we let the inbound come in, we do the work associated, and it is a lot of work. And we hope that we write some business. So I would ask you, if you're being objective, when you have inbound coming in versus prospecting being outbound, which one do you quote and close more business on? Is it the inbound stuff? Because in my experience, you're lucky if you get 20% of that to close because every single person's shopping. Most of the time, you're wasting your time going to markets that have already been approached. You're going to wholesalers that have already been inundated. You're just dealing with crap, to be honest with you, in most cases. And it's not something that I really want to entertain in my agency. I would much rather not have that volume and have a steady volume of the stuff we want to write, which means what do I have to do? Nothing different than normal. Why is the sudden influx of inbound leads so attractive to all of us when we know that a lot of it is price shopping garbage that none of us wants to write? It's the old fallacy that we confuse activity with productivity. Just because you're active doesn't mean you're being productive. Just because you're getting leads doesn't mean that you're closing business. And you really need to be tracking this stuff because you're allowing you to replace proven processes and procedures in prospecting. That's a lot of alliteration right there, to be replaced by inbound stuff. And it's just not intentional. It's not exactly who you want to write. And you're not probably filling your direct carriers with the type of business they want because you can't control what's coming in and what's not. So think about that. If you're one of these agencies out here who thinks that everything is going exactly the way you want it to, and you are just getting every lead you can possibly imagine, and you're just so busy that you don't have time to prospect, kidding yourself. You're going to need those prospects at some point. Don't stop what got you here. Continue on, even though the market's hard. You know, when we were in Producers in Paradise last week, part of what we do is go out on an offshore fishing trip. And we do that on the last Sunday. We meet on Friday and Saturday, and then Sunday is our play day as a family. And so if you have the ability to withstand a little bit of rougher seas, not terrible, you can go offshore in center console boats. We took 10 boats out fishing this year. Or you can stay back inshore and you can go on an eco tour, which takes them to a sandbar and allows them to snorkel, see dolphins, all that kind of stuff. But we went offshore this year and the weather was pretty nice. So we got to run and we got to get out into a few hundred feet of water because we were looking for mahi mahi and we found it. But I want to talk about what that process looked like a little bit because it wasn't exactly what I would like from an action standpoint or an activity standpoint, but it was exactly what we're talking about from a productivity standpoint. And so if you've ever been offshore, you know that the very first thing you do after you get on the boat and leave the marina is you typically either go to a floating trap that has pinfish in it for bait, or you go and find grass on the bottom that's housing some bait fish and you throw a cast net out and you cast that net and catch as many bait fish as you can and you fill those into your live well, and that is what you use to fish. Now, when you're going for mahi, you can use live bait, but the other thing is a lot of times you can use lures. And you know, I personally prefer a jig, and there's a reason why, and it's because I want to keep my line wet. If I have to rebait a hook with live bait every time, that means that every time I catch a fish and get it in the boat, I then have to go over and catch another bait fish out of the live well, either with a small net or my hand. I have to turn around on a rocking boat. I have to set that on the hook the proper way. I have to drop it back down. and wash, rinse, repeat over and over. If I'm using a jig, I'm literally throwing my bait out, jigging it 2 or 3 times, getting a mahi on, hooking it, bringing it in, and my bait goes right back in the water because I'm using an artificial lure. So I was thinking about the whole process of fishing and how we're going about this and how it ties into being a producer and actually going out and hunting for deals. And the first thing I thought of was you got to keep your line wet. You got to keep the lure in. There's a lot of fancy ways to go out and prospect, but it keeps you from actually doing it and being in the game. So rather than having to hunt for bait, rather than having to uh, constantly rebait my hook with a live bait fish, I'm just throwing it back in and I'm getting my reps. And every single time I was pulling something out. And I didn't land every fish, but I landed pretty much the majority of them. And so, rule number one, I wasn't just active, I was also productive. And I did that because I consciously figured out what I was going to do, what I was going to present to that fish to get them to take the bait, bite the hook, and end up in our cooler. So stay in the game. Stay in the game prospecting, keep your line wet. The other thing was we had to find where the fish were. You know, if you've ever fished for mahi, you know offshore that you have to find birds. That's what we look for. It's not like going to a reef that never moves and having GPS coordinates. You actually have to do some work to find these fish. So you look for birds because birds are feeding off of bait fish that are typically on the surface. Once you see birds, once you get close, you look to see, is there a grass line there? Is there seagrass? Because if there's seagrass, you know that there are bait fish coming up from the bottom and nibbling on the roots of that seagrass or the underbelly of that grass patch. And that's what the birds are diving down to get. If the birds are diving down and you see grass, then you know with relative certainty that there are bait fish underneath that patch and there are bigger fish that are coming up and eating those bait fish. And that's exactly where you want to be. Well, we had a lot of rough weather in Florida over the course of the couple of weeks prior to Producers in Paradise. And so the grass patches weren't organized and we were far enough off. There just weren't really a ton of birds. So we spent a lot of time driving around. We were looking for the exact spot we wanted to go. And I could tell that my friends Dan Smith, Mike Carey, Doug Benz, and Josh Gurley, who were on the boat with me, were getting a little bit antsy because it took a while to deal with the bait, took a while to find the place where we were going to go. And so I told him, I'm like, listen, guys, I know how this story ends. I've been out with our captain a number of times and he's looking for the honey hole. When he finds it, we will likely never, ever have to move the rest of the day. And that's exactly what happened. Probably 10 minutes later, we're out in the middle of the ocean. I see the birds. There's literally a dozen of them, and they are all dive bombing, which is a great sign. And as we pull closer, we see a nice line of grass. And this is exactly how mahi should be caught. Like everything was perfect in it. So we pull up and we're getting ready to start trolling. And as soon as we do, we get one on. Now, if you've ever fished for mahi, you know the other thing is that they're school fish. You know that they stick together. So when you catch one, you don't bring it into the boat. You bring it up next to the boat and you let it stay in the water and the others will school around it. So I look in and I see literally hundreds. There were so many mahi there. It was crazy. They were all behind the boat. It was an absolute feeding frenzy. All you had to do is get your line out, which I'm glad I had a jig because that line was going to stay wet. And every single time you threw, you caught something. And we were there probably for close to an hour. Here's where it gets interesting, though. If you're going to catch mahi-mahi, they have to measure from the nose of the fish to the fork of their tail, because they have a forked tail. It has to be 20 inches. Can't be any shorter than that. It has to be at least 20 inches in order for it to be a keeper. And so the first throw out, I get one. And my goodness, this thing was absolutely gorgeous. Perfect. I figured it's probably 22, 23 inches. Get it in the boat. You know, we left the one in next to the boat, but I get it in the boat and it is. It's 22, 23 inches right in the cooler. Quick as we get it off the hook on my lure, it's right back in the water. And I catch another one and I pull it in and I'm like, man, that's close. Let's take a look at it. 19.5 inches. Got to throw that one back. Back in the water, 19 inches. Got to throw that one back. Throw it in the water, 19.5 inches. You got to throw it back. It's not big enough to keep. And I kept doing this and doing this and doing this to the point I probably threw 24 fish back that were literally only an inch or a half inch too short for us to keep it. But rules are rules, and we don't have a choice because captain loses his boat if we get found breaking those rules, and we're not going to do that. So I'm sitting here thinking to myself, man, I'm having a great time. I'm catching a ton of fish. I'm actually getting a little worn out, but what do I really have to show for it? Is there anything there for me to even show, or am I just fishing to fish for the sport of it? And the answer was the latter. I was just catching fish because the thing is, nothing that I was catching I could keep. It didn't matter if it was an inch short or a foot short, it wasn't big enough to go in the cooler. And the problem with that is that was the mission for the day. Because when we take those 10 center console boats offshore to go fishing, we're going fishing with the mission that we're catching our dinner for that night. We rent out a facility and we do what's called a hook and cook at Dante's in Key West. And we take the fish that we catch that's been cleaned and filleted, and we take that to Dante's and they end up blackening it, frying it, and grilling it so that we can eat what we kill, just like we do when we're out on the streets as producers. And as I continue to throw my lure in, yeah, I'm having fun, but I'm not feeding anybody. And I got to thinking to myself, this is no different than the people right now who think they don't need to prospect in the hard market. They anchor up or they float in a specific spot because they get a little action. They have people paying attention to them. They're getting their line wet. They're bringing it in, and then they have to throw it back because it doesn't work out. What happened to me fishing for mahi is what's happening to those agencies out there that are abandoning prospecting in the hard market. And the reality is, as much fun as I had, as many fish as I caught, but had to throw back, I didn't achieve the objective. I didn't make forward progress to help people eat. And if I was in production and that was the same case, I wouldn't have money to buy groceries, make the house payment, or anything else. So the moral of the story is, even though we had action, even though we had fun catching, we weren't hitting our objectives, or if it's an agency, our KPIs. And the reality is we probably should have gone and looked for another spot, even if it would have taken us 30, 45 minutes to find it, because we needed the fish that were going to end up in the cooler to be able to be served at dinner that night. So that's my message. That's my message from Producers in Paradise. What I learned fishing, what I'm hearing, and where I think you need to adjust your thoughts with this hard market. And I hope that you take that to heart and you think through it, because in your mind, you probably think, nah, David doesn't know what he's talking about. I promise you I do, and there's going to come a day when you wish you had listened to what I had to say, because it's going to come back and bite you when you least expect it. Until next time, we'll catch you guys. I hope that everybody has a great weekend, and we will see you next week on Shop Talk. See ya.